Have you ever caught yourself telling a story and later realized it wasn't entirely true? Not because you wanted to deceive anyone, not because you were trying to manipulate someone, but because, somehow, the version you remembered felt more real than what actually happened. And if that's happened to you, here's something unsettling. You may be lying far more often than you think. Not to other people, to yourself. The strange part is that most people never notice they're doing it, because the most convincing lies are not the ones told intentionally. They're the ones we genuinely believe. And by the end of this video, you might start noticing a few of those lies hiding inside your own mind. Imagine this. A friend confronts you about something you said a few weeks ago. You immediately respond, "That's not what happened." You're confident, certain, maybe even offended that they would question your memory. But later, after thinking about it, you realize they were right. You remembered it differently, not because your memory failed, because your mind quietly edited the story. Most of us think lying is a conscious act. We imagine someone deliberately hiding the truth. But human psychology is far stranger than that. Sometimes we distort reality without realizing it. Sometimes we rewrite events without ever intending to. And sometimes we build entire identities around stories that aren't completely true. The uncomfortable question is, why? Why would the mind do that? The answer begins with something all human beings desperately need: psychological comfort. Every person wants to see themselves as a good person, a smart person, a reasonable person, a capable person. We want our decisions to make sense. We want our mistakes to have explanations. We want our failures to feel justified. And when reality threatens that image, the mind starts protecting itself, not with logic, with stories. Let's say someone gets rejected from a job. One version of the story is, "I wasn't prepared enough." That hurts. It challenges their self-image. But another version feels safer. The interviewers were biased. They didn't understand my potential. It wasn't fair. Now, sometimes those things are true, but notice what happens. The mind naturally gravitates toward explanations that protect self-worth, not necessarily explanations that are completely accurate. Without realizing it, we become the hero of our own narrative. And heroes rarely see their own flaws clearly. This doesn't make you dishonest. It makes you human. In fact, one of the most fascinating things about the human mind is that it values emotional survival almost as much as physical survival. Think about that. If touching a hot stove protects your body from harm, then certain psychological distortions protect your identity from emotional pain. The mind learns to soften uncomfortable truths, to reshape painful memories, to create explanations that are easier to live with. And over time, those explanations stop feeling like stories. They start feeling like facts. This is why two people can experience the exact same event and remember it completely differently. Neither person may be intentionally lying, yet both versions can feel true, because memory isn't a recording, it's a reconstruction. Every time you remember something, your brain isn't pulling out a perfectly preserved file. It's rebuilding the event. And during that rebuilding process, small details change. Emotions influence perception. Beliefs influence interpretation. The story evolves. Slowly, quietly, without permission. Now here's where it gets even more interesting. The lies we tell ourselves aren't always about the past. Sometimes they're about the present. Think about how often people say things like, "I'm fine. I don't care. It doesn't bother me." Meanwhile, they're losing sleep over it, checking their phone every few minutes, replaying conversations in their head, feeling hurt in ways they refuse to admit. Why? Because acknowledging certain emotions can feel threatening. If admitting loneliness makes you feel weak, you'll tell yourself you're independent. If admitting fear feels uncomfortable, you'll call it caution. If admitting heartbreak feels unbearable, you'll pretend you've moved on. The mind becomes incredibly creative when protecting itself from vulnerability. And sometimes the person most successfully deceived is the one doing the deceiving. But there's another layer to this, a deeper one. Many unconscious lies begin in childhood. When we're young, we learn stories about who we are. Maybe someone repeatedly told you that you're not good enough. Maybe you were compared to others. Maybe you felt ignored, rejected, overlooked. And eventually those experiences become beliefs. I'll never be successful. Nobody really cares about me. I'm not lovable. Years later, those beliefs still shape reality. Not because because they're true, because they feel true. And that's one of the most dangerous forms of self-deception. Believing painful stories simply because you've carried them for a long time. Some people spend decades living inside narratives they never consciously chose. They interpret every setback as proof, every rejection as confirmation, every failure as evidence. The mind selectively collects information that supports the story and ignores information that challenges it. Without realizing it, people become prisoners of beliefs that aren't even accurate. But here's the twist. The goal isn't to eliminate every psychological illusion. That's impossible. Every human being has blind spots. Every human being distorts reality sometimes. The goal is awareness, because the moment you notice a story, you gain power over it. The moment you ask, is this actually true? Something changes. The automatic narrative weakens, and curiosity takes its place. Maybe you're not as incapable as you think. Maybe you're not as unwanted as you assume. Maybe the story you've repeated for years is only one interpretation of reality, not reality itself. And that's a liberating realization, because if the mind can unconsciously create limiting stories, can also create new ones, healthier ones, more honest ones. The truth is, most people aren't struggling because they're being lied to by others. They're struggling because of stories they've unknowingly accepted as truth. Stories about their worth, their future, their relationships, their potential. Stories that quietly shape every decision they make. The hardest lies to recognize are never the ones spoken out loud. They're the ones whispered internally. The ones repeated so often they become invisible. So the next time you're absolutely certain about a memory, a belief, a judgment, or even your opinion of yourself, pause for a moment and ask a simple question. What if this is only the story I've been telling myself? Because sometimes growth doesn't begin when you learn something new. It begins when you question something you've always believed. And that might be the most honest thing you ever do.